Hello, and welcome to this podcast on gamification of workplace learning, where we are talking to leaders and experts to get insights and learn from their experiences. Today, we have with us Jeevan Joshi. Jeevan has almost 3 decades of digital transformation consulting experience across Australia, New Zealand, and India. He's worked for organizations like Westpac, Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Sumtotal. Currently, he works as an advisor on Future Ready Training System project for the Australian Army. Jeevan's been passionate about progress in our field and had earlier founded Learning Cafe, a community of experienced L&D professionals, which hosted webinars and conferences to discuss the issues of learning and performance. More recently, Jeevan has also started EX Assembly, which focuses on building employee experience practice leadership. With that brief intro, let's welcome Jeevan. Jeevan, very welcome.
Thank you, Amit, and it's a pleasure to speak to you again. I know that we've worked together in the past few years ago, so it's always good to get into a conversation with you anytime.
Yeah, so good to see you. I hope all is well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, all look in this very difficult climate. Fortunately, in Australia, we have those problems to a much lesser extent. So fingers crossed, everything goes
Yeah,
well everywhere.
yeah, fantastic, fantastic. Jeevan, so of course we have worked together earlier, and I've known you for so many years, and I know that you've had a very interesting journey working across different countries, different types of assignments, and you've been on both sides of the table, if I can say, even bringing both sides of the tables together in your community building experiences. Why don't we start with a brief history of what's been your journey like and what are your key focus areas today?
Oh, look, absolutely. So I keep, telling people I don't actually want to count the number of years that I've been in this field, but it's kind of closing on 3 decades now. But yeah, so I been, I guess, playing in the space between people and technology, so that intersection for a very long time. And this is the time when we used to, have floppy disks, right? From that and Foxbase as the software. But very interested in kind of using technology to improve business outcomes and connections within the enterprise. And certainly has been my focus. So I kind of have worked in HR and learning technology, design, implementation, review, strategy and roadmaps. And I've kind of gradually progressed my skill set and the services or expertise that I provide from implementation more now to roadmap and strategy. But as you're aware, I actually like to go back to the dive back into the implementation because I actually believe that you kind of need to have a very strong on the ground experience to be able to develop a good strategy which will work in the real workplace. So that's I guess been my focus with a special focus on learning. I really find learning extremely interesting, much more interesting than the other areas of HR that has been my background in the past because there are so many moving parts to learning and things change every day, as you're aware. And it's one of the few areas where you have a combination of helping people become better people at the same time. You can actually access technology, new technologies, which come into play every day. So it's a very exciting field, a nice combination. So I've been doing that, and as you mentioned, that we kind of ran Learning Cafe and EAS Assembly as thought, not so much thought leadership, but more practice leadership. How do you convert great ideas and great strategies and great technologies into something that actually works in the realities of the organization? And certainly that has been my focus is how do you deploy learning, knowledge, and collaboration at an enterprise scale across organizations in a very effective manner. So it's that effectiveness and the practicality of implementing, which is my current focus at the moment. So my current assignments has given me the scale to actually experiment and deploy learning knowledge solutions on scale, which is a very really interesting exercise. So that's where I am, and I continue to believe that the Peter Senge's learning organization provides a really great foundation for implementing enterprise learning, and constantly trying to see if I can help clients do that.
Hmm. Excellent, excellent. I really, so of course, I have been exposed to your communities in past, and I've been through some of the sessions, uh, and you've been able to bring together, you know, practitioners and real thought leaders to those to essentially distill what works and what doesn't, and what practical ideas people can take. And I see that that's also a focus area in your own planning of your career, if I can say, uh, theory practice kind of a cycle that you adopt, which is fantastic, fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing that. uh, I hope and wish that EX assembly can give you that joy and pleasure, and also deliver the kind of goods that you are hoping it will deliver for the community.
Thank you.
Great. For the topic that we have for today, Jeevan, gamification is something that uh, is been there as something that was there on the hype cycle. It has probably fallen off the curve now a little bit. But in general, what do you think gamification in the workplace means? Not just for learning, but in the workplace. What are your initial thoughts on that?
Sure, and as we've kind of discussed before, really, there are two broad definitions or interpretations of gamification, right? The number one is the use of games, right, for increasing skills, and this could be kind of based on similar to the PlayStation
Mhm.
or Xbox game kind of environment for increasing the engagement and effectiveness of learning. The other definition, which is probably the more correct definition, although I'm not very semantic about these things, is the introduction or embedding of game mechanics into our everyday work, right? To make sure to ensure that the we are encouraged to learn as part of doing everyday work, right? So it's kind of hidden, almost embedded, and it just kind of happens seamlessly and encourages people and or nudges people to learn that a little bit more or to operate in a more efficient manner. So my focus really is kind of on the second definition. I am a big fan of games, online games. So I must admit that I haven't played PlayStation for a long time, but I have spent a lot of time on Bloons, which is a New Zealand based balloon popping game. Spent quite more time than I should, but certainly been exposed to the games. But I think gamification is of the gamification of processes or everyday activities to encourage skill development and learning is of more interest to me, simply because it is scalable, it can be leveraged, and it has impact on many different fronts and many different levels, which can really increase the performance of individuals and teams, and also as an enterprise. And to be honest, it's also a little bit more challenging and to design and implement, and that's where I think the fun is, to be able to not only kind of design it up front, but make sure that it is sustained and it
Mm.
keeps delivering the efficiencies that it is supposed to, because it does require constant care and attention to make sure that it's delivering. So it's I will focus on gamification, which is introduction of game like elements, badges, points, um, and that will be my focus for my conversation.
Mm.
um, so certainly you're right, it's kind of fallen off the hype cycle radar a little bit, and I'm actually quite thankful for that, which means that we can actually get beyond the excitement of using gamification for anything and everything,
Mm.
and for the sake of using it, which then actually robs the credibility of gamification as a tool. So I'm a big fan of building credibility for a certain mechanism or a technique or a tool before it is implemented on large scale. So it needs to earn its bread and butter before it is accepted. And I can see in a lot of instances where gamification has been a solution looking for a problem, right? And that's fine. It's
Yeah.
part of maturing and growing up. You don't need to try, but I think the time is good now to introduce that. And technology also has now advanced so that you can actually design an enterprise gamification strategy approach and a platform to track
Yeah.
and maintain a gamification. So it's come a long way. However, I think it's the use of gamification, or for that matter, any learning innovation has to be quite carefully considered for the simple reason that learning is not necessarily the what people come to work for, right? There's a certain part of the time that you spend for learning, and hopefully you learn while you work. But people come to deliver performance, and they come to get a promotion, they come to do a good job. So if the gamification can support those motivations and those drivers, I think that's the best situation to be. And I'm still experimenting and trying out techniques to do that. So for me, gamification, if it can be invisible, embedded, it just happens. That really would be like the best design of gamification, for me. So those are kind of my thoughts. Very conscious of using gamification at the right places. Um, and there are places where it can be used and places where it should not be used. There are also consideration of ethical issues coming into play now with gamification. Tracking is one of them. So certainly there are a lot of factors to be considered in enterprise deployment of gamification, which requires collaboration with a lot of other functions, ICT, or technology, policy, etc. So um, to implement gamification at a level one, which is kind of immature, level two, a little bit more localized is good and is kind of fine. But going beyond that is where the challenge is to move it to the enterprise level.
Yeah.
So a few thoughts on to begin with, Amit.
Yeah. No, lots of great points there, Jeevan. In fact, what I really liked about was straight off your focus is around doing it for the right reason. And like you mentioned, it was a solution that was trying to find a problem. And that's when you find that people going to conferences and uh, hearing about gamification, possibly seeing some great examples as well, but not being able to translate that to their own environments, but just think that let's do gamification because that's the thing that they want to do. But it does take time, so it is always good to get into that falling off the curve situation, so that only serious practitioners are there, and the uh, if I can say, a little bit of frivolous excitement has gone and evaporated. And that's when you
Correct.
start seeing real implementation. Fantastic. I also like what you said about, it being invisible and embedded because, uh, and that's also something that you linked with supporting performance, so, and that's probably the best way. I also believe organizations can implement gamification. So you've covered so many things, and which I think would make gamification very compelling. Any other reasons why you would think a workplace learning situation or an L&D team should be looking at gamification?
Yeah, look, I think what gamification does is it actually provides, and I guess my thinking is always at the enterprise scale. It's like, how do you deploy it for 10,000 people, 100,000 people? So I think it actually provides a fabric of engaging with employees and increasing their motivation and
Mhm,
engagement,
mhm,
which actually would be quite difficult to achieve if other mechanisms which are more effort intensive are required, right? So if gamification is embedded, of course you're kind of encouraging people to learn, to perform, to improve themselves. But at the same time, it actually becomes an embedded way of enterprise um, to increase engagement and motivation of the employees. It's kind of almost like a, you know, yeah, invisible force that HR or learning has in terms of engaging with the employees. So it is a mechanism of reaching out, and then potentially also encouraging them. And this is where we just need to be careful, not necessarily directing them or unduly influencing them, because gamification can do that. It can give you a nudge in the direction that the company wants to take, and you've got to be a little ethical about that. But certainly provide the opportunity for employees to have personalized nudges, right, in terms of increased learning or increased performance, which may be contextualized to their own level of skill, right? So it actually, so gamification can do that, is provide you that mechanism, to achieve that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And I kind of reflect on some of the things that may have happened in the financial industry, where typically, traders and even salespeople, their package is really gamified, right? Uh, Even though we may not call it gamified as much, but and that may nudge them into actions which eventually are not good either for their own institution or for society at large. So that's possibly a great or an example that we can all think of, that's been published over and over again over the last many decades.
Look, absolutely, Amit, and that's a really good point you bring up, because even though we kind of talk about gamification being new, it's been around for a long time. It's been around for times immemorial, including the little star stamps that kids get from their teachers when they do good things in class. It's not electronic. It's
Yeah.
it's it's a very effective means of motivating kids. I know my own son, who was extremely mischievous, actually settled down in class because he knew he had to get the star from the teacher. So it's been around, for a long time in different shapes and forms. And this aspect of the financial industry and the whole setup encouraging the wrong behaviors is certainly a lesson that we can all learn, which is why I'm always kind of careful around identifying the ethics of using gamification, just not from the types of nudges that you give through gamification, but potentially also the data collection ethics of gamification. Yeah, that you're absolutely right about gamification can be used both ways.
Yeah. True. And great example that you mentioned about using those star charts, etc. I remember our daughter would be so thrilled when she would come back from her school in her kindergarten, and she would show us, see, I got a star on my hand, all of those things. And if you look at those star charts, I was surprised. I was looking for it in preparation for my webinar last month. Some of them actually say the good behavior chart, and that's something that stood out. I may not have noticed it critically earlier, but they're not saying it's a game chart or a points chart. It's a behavior chart. And that's where I think the crux possibly lies, is you're trying to use this means to influence or build desired behaviors. If you do it well, you'll probably do it good for the people, for the society. If you don't do it well, of course, you are then leading to undesired behaviors as well.
And look, and you're right. The thing is that I think gamification, if that's what we call, which is rewarding and nudging people to the right behavior, is going to exist, right? So whenever people need to be rewarded, there is some form of gamification, whether it's gamified principles, whether it's in your performance appraisal, the contribution that you've made to the company. That's also, performance appraisal system
Right.
is also
Right.
kind of a gamified system which has been around for a long time. So certainly I think that's a really good point. And I would certainly think that they kind of need to be quite well designed. What has helped now is technology. So it does enable us to not only scale but potentially also track your improved behaviors or outcomes over a long period of time. So definitely, I think it's a similar but a different game,
Yeah.
because of the
Yeah.
use of technology.
Yeah. So that's kind of leading on to another important aspect. Um, you know, my question is really about how much of that data capability makes gamification as a process or a tool compelling for workplace learning? You talked about all of that tracking that's possible. So do you think that's a contributor?
Yes, look, it is, and I guess, and this is an aspect which has a lot of angles to it, right?
Mm,
So one angle is collecting data for an individual,
mm,
in terms of their points that they've collected or what they've done. Um, I think I was reading about an example where they've embedded gamified elements in the PO order generation process in a company,
mm,
right? So if you take, if you use the most optimal path for PO generation, and approving it and paying it, the finance people get a few points
yeah,
extra, right? Or if you take the long way, which or the unoptimized way, you don't get any points or you get negative points, right? So it's almost that level of tracking that can be done to kind of improve performance of everything, potentially that sits on technology. um, but the you're very right, in terms of the tracking, because number one is that you track data around an individual, but do you really need to do that for gamification? You potentially may not need that, because what you do is you just track a person during that process or activity, right? So I give the example of purchase order
yeah,
or invoicing, right? So you track it for them, and they know that they haven't taken the right pathway
mm,
to pay the PO, right? And then you direct them, or you indicate to them that there is a better way to do that, right? And maybe there's a little learning resource that pops up,
yeah,
but that interaction's finished,
yeah.
right? So they've improved at that point of activity. Now, do you really need to collect that data? Maybe you do, to then at the end of the year identify who's got the most points, but you may not need to, because if your intention is just to improve at the point of need, that's done, that's
Yeah.
achieved, right? And that's where you stop, and that's where you stop tracking, and maybe you don't need to collect the data. So it'll be nice to collect as much data as you can, but collection of data comes with the added responsibility of making sure that it's collected, stored, according to the principles, the first principles, um, plus also just making sure that data from 1 year ago on a similar thing might be different from what it is now. So it does impose a little bit of responsibility, and you've got to question whether you really need to collect the data in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, uh, the the way I would see it is there's a little bit of, if I can call it, small data, individual task level, and that if that helps in nudging, suggesting, recommendation, that's great to improve those tasks. Maybe on a larger performance improvement initiative or a behavior change initiative, which is probably going to stretch a few months or even quarters, you may want to gather a little more data so that you can customize or personalize the journey that people are having, etc. So not what only for gamification, but for any sort of a learning journey that you want to create. So yeah, I mean, we can use that data as well, and it may be helpful for personalizing what you suggest to people based on what others may have done or how they have succeeded, etc., and what's the best path, etc. But yeah, absolutely, point taken about, data is sensitive, so we need to follow all of those processes and just collect what we should be.
Look, but yes, and I don't think that learning professionals are exceptionally talented around the use of data. So to put it lightly. So I think we just also just need to make sure that the level of gamification is according to the maturity of technology learning in the organization. And I think that just comes along with maturity in terms of looking at all aspects and then fine tuning it as you go along.
Yeah, yeah, great. Jeevan, do you have, and this could be from your previous assignments or your interactions with so many industry leaders that you have been uh, connected with and spoken with on your communities. Uh, any examples of good gamification that you may have come across that you recall that you can share?
Look, one of the one I mentioned before, which was gamification of your normal finance process to
Yeah, yeah,
improve the effectiveness of the process, and I really like that angle. Is kind of embedding gamification in everyday activities so that you have small increments of improvement, which in the long run becomes multiplies into large increments. There certainly is one. Um, Look, the other one is gamification and the the points or the expertise level or the badges that you collect along the way being used across industries and across companies, right? I think that is a really interesting concept, and the fact that if you get a badge for coming back to this really boring example of invoicing a purchase order, but for example, it is if you get a badge for excellent work in learning design,
yeah,
right? And you
yeah,
kind of get a badge for that because you're a superb learning professional. Um, hopefully, that can be then carried across to as part of your CV to or your or resume, to and recognized in other jobs and other industries. So this whole kind of standardizing maybe some elements of gamification, which then give you standard batches, which hopefully can be then recognized and used across different lines of separation in organizations and
yeah,
industry. I think that's another one that's starting to happen. I've seen that, but that the challenge always is to make sure that um, that everybody accepts that badge and that credibility, because I think everybody's really interested in generating their own badges. So
yeah,
I think that's another example. The other one, I've seen gamification being used in analog. So gamification doesn't have to be digital. I've seen some really good examples of simple, cost-effective, easy to implement, used in classroom workshops.
yeah,
For example, to give you an example, is that let us say you've got different age people, let's say people of my age group or older, coming to learn new digital technologies, for example, right? The fact that you are so old, and the older you are, you might actually get 1 point for actually turning up for the workshop, because that means you've taken a bigger challenge,
yeah,
right? So I think it can be used in that way. But the interesting question is the value of points and badges. I think that's that's the other interesting aspect of the whole discussion, which I think we should focus on is you could issue badges till the cows come home, but I think those badges and points need to have some value, and they don't need to be monetary value, although it'll be nice to have monetary value. But this whole concept of rewarding people in gamification through meaningful rewards, I think is really important, and I think something that needs to be considered.
yeah, yeah. No, you're right. So I think it's the easy end of gamification, if I can say, points, badges, and leaderboards, and also the visible one. So for anybody who's excited about it, they may start looking at how do we add these and possibly miss the bigger picture. So you are adding points and badges instead of giving scores to a test, and that may not excite your team for very long. Maybe once or twice it's okay. So I think the crucial part possibly there is to, as you said, make it meaningful, make it interesting for your teams, and be watchful that it may become mundane very soon. If you continue to do it without real uh, meaning attached to it, you can do it once or twice. There is novelty value, but it wanes off pretty quickly.
Right. Very correct.
Great. So I think points, badges, and leaderboards. I've been speaking to a lot of experts and reading up, and none of them really say don't do it. They always say do it with the right intent and don't overdo it. So I think that's probably the advice that I stick with now. Fantastic. Also, there's this challenge of games and gamification, sometimes used interchangeably in organizations when they try to implement it. But purely from a gamification implementation perspective, organizations have faced challenges in it being seen as something which is less serious, frivolous, maybe meant for children, not for adults, etc. Have you experienced that, in your personal capacity or when you've talked to other experts?
Yes, and we've gone through that whole journey,
Mm,
and I was and still part of the serious games, and that's actually I like the term serious games, which is it's a game but it's for serious purposes.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but I guess yes, there is a tendency for it to be seen frivolous, or used to be. I think that's changing now, for the simple reason that we've now in the workforce have a big proportion of people who have come through the games route. So from Sega to PS3,
yeah,
Xbox, and now Fortnite, for example. So there's a larger proportion of people who have experienced and learned and actually are quite experts in games and gamifications and points and badges and experts, and expertise level. Um, so I think the moment is right. I don't think it is necessarily seen as frivolous, but it can be seen as frivolous if it is designed and produced for not designed not to meet business requirements, or doesn't
yeah,
help people do their jobs. Then of course it can be seen as frivolous. The other thing, of course, is that I think the standards or the expectations from gamification or gaming work um, are much higher now, right?
mm,
Because people have experienced what, and you play some of these games, they're just terrific. They just transport you to another world. So you can see that the expectation is up there, and what corporate enterprise work gamification delivers is something here, and that's fine, because work is not play. And so that gap is always going to be there, but we just need to be aware that the benchmark has been raised. So yeah, like I'm kind of hoping that I think gamification will become mainstream, embedded, invisible in the times to come. So I think we've kind of reached a sweet spot right now with everything. So certainly great hopes for the times ahead, especially since it's becoming mainstream. I think it's gone off the hype and becoming mainstream, especially in personal life, and anything that happens in personal life usually translates back into work, because that's what the employees demand.
yeah, yeah. No, that's what's been happening with L&D, especially ever since you know adoption of new technology, especially with mobile. And that not just L&D, but for the whole enterprise. Mobile was a technology that really moved from the personal space to office space, and anything associated with that is possibly following the same trend. So you're seeing more and more things happening in our personal lives and moving back to our corporate lives from there.
Correct.
Very interesting, Jeevan. Jeevan, do you have any advice that you'd like to share with L&D professionals who are trying to get started with gamification or just started with gamification? How can they do it better?
Oh, look, absolutely. I think the first thing would be experience it. So definitely, be involved in a genuine exercise, or participate in a gamified or game experience. Secondly is, do not underestimate the complexity required to implement new learning technologies. Definitely. And that's the second one. And I guess thirdly is user-centric design. So just even though you might have grand visions of what gamification can achieve, start small,
Hmm.
for which the user will accept and tolerate, and then grow from there. It's establish credibility before you go big bang and try and make gamification the next best thing since sliced bread.
True, true. And yeah, I think if people can start small and have some easy wins and build credibility, like you mentioned, that usually paves the way for a more stronger initiative in the organization. Fantastic, fantastic. This has been very helpful, Jeevan. Very insightful for me. Uh, Thank you so much. But before we close, Jeevan, is there uh, a best way to reach you if people want to reach you? Is LinkedIn the best way or some other?
Yes, I think LinkedIn would be the best way to reach me. So Jeevan Joshi, I'm there, and yeah, there are just too many I think channels of communications nowadays. I like to focus on one because I've got to do some real work at times.
Yeah, same with me. I'm mostly on LinkedIn, but nowhere else. But this has been very, very interesting, Jeevan. Thank you so much for your time today. I wish you
Thank
all
you,
the
Amit.
best in your endeavors.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you.